friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I am so excited to talk to you about a novel that I read like right before I got super busy with school stuff, and I just can't wait to share my thoughts with you about it. The novel I'm talking about is called Four Dead Queens by Astrid Schultz. Probably saying her last name wrong. I'm terrible at saying people's names. I'm so sorry about it. But listen, can we just talk about the fact that clearly I am a fan of books that involve queens. I am a fan of medieval times. Like, I just am a sucker. So the fact that it took me this long to read this book is just shameful. I've had it for a really long time on my shelf. For whatever reason, I finally saw it on my shelf, wanted to get my hands on it, and it did not disappoint. Essentially, the premise of this is it is set in a medieval world where there are four different queens for the four different quadrants of the land, and each one of the queens essentially is pulled from like her childhood and is then brought in to be the queen, and she remains the queen until she passes. And while she is queen, it is her obligation and duty to basically be paired up with a man who then is supposed to essentially impregnate her, and she's supposed to then have her child, but her child is supposed to be immediately taken from her and raised in the quadrant that she represents. So it's a very interesting premise. There are no kings in this story, you just have queens, and the main character in this story is a character named Carolee, I believe is how you say her name, and she is living in one of the quadrants where life's a little bit harder. They're struggling a little bit in general. The people there aren't as well off as in other quadrants, and her father makes his living essentially as a fisherman, but she doesn't want to live that life, and she becomes friends with a boy in her quadrant whose father is kind of a slimy guy. He runs basically a black market auction, and she starts to get swept up into that family's life choices and becomes a pickpocket. And she becomes one of the greatest pickpockets for this father, and eventually her friend, who's the father's son, becomes the runner of the black market when the dad is no longer around. However, one night she gets involved with pickpocketing, sort of a high up person, and she ends up learning some information about the impending death of the four queens and their assassination. And she is left with the responsibility to figure out what to do to prevent the queen's death and make sure that the structure of the world she lives in can remain intact. This book is such a page turner. It essentially takes place over the course of, it says 3 days. It says one big lie, two forbidden romances, 3 days to catch a killer. So it is very fascinating. There are so many twists and turns with this book. I typically have a good sense with young adult literature. I can kind of predict some of the plot points that are going to come. And some of that I did expect, but there were other twists and turns that I was like, ooh, this is really good. I like this a lot. I don't typically love super like suspenseful action stories, but this was just awesome. It was so well written. It was so interesting. It did have some romance in it, but it wasn't like over the top, gushy, like soul sucking, takes away from the main character's strength kind of romance. It was more just learning to be selfless, which I'm all for. I can get behind that kind of romance, like be a selfless person, do the right thing, morally upright. I'm all for that. So I definitely recommend this book. I very much enjoyed it. I also enjoyed that in our OwlCrate we were given this insert of the four queens, because the story is told from their point of view and also Caroline's, which I think is really cool. I really am a sucker for books that have multiple point of views. If it's done well, it is fascinating to hear from multiple characters in a story. Not everyone does it smashingly, but this book, this author crushed it. So I would definitely recommend this book. If you've read it, let me know your thoughts below about all the twists and turns, but don't spoil anything for anyone, because that would totally ruin the fun of this book, and that would not be cool. But if you're somebody who likes medieval worlds, you like a little bit of futuristic mixed with medieval, you like the idea of like suspense, and you like the idea of trying to solve a mystery, this is the book for you, and I would highly, highly recommend it. Guys, you're probably not going to hear from me in the book world very much in the future because I am just swamped with not a lot of free time and a lot of work to do, so I'm not giving myself much ability to leisurely read. This is sort of a great one to end my time with free reading for a little while, so I hope you enjoyed hearing about this book, and I'll talk to you in the next video real soon. Bye.